Slowly the world we're living in is getting smaller, and all we say is, please, at least leave us alone in our living rooms. Let me have my toaster and my TV and my steel-belted radios, and I won't say anything. Just leave us alone. Well, I'm not going to leave you alone. I want you to get mad. Hey.
Human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria.
In a sluggish economy, inflation and recession hits the land of the free. Standing unemployment lines, blame the government for hard times. We just get by however we can. We all gotta duck when the shit hits the fan. 10 kids in a Cadillac stand in line for welfare checks. Let's all leech off the state. Gee, the money's really great. We just get by however we can. We all gotta duck when the shit hits the fan. Soup lines, free loaves of bread, 5-pound blocks of cheese, bags of groceries. Social security has run out on you and me. We do whatever we can. Gotta duck when the shit hits the fan. Doobity-doo wop wop, say what, yeah? We just get by however we can. We all gotta duck when the shit hits the fan. Soup lines, free loaves of bread, 5-pound blocks of cheese, bags of groceries. Social security has run out on you and me. We do whatever we can. Gotta duck when the shit hits the fan.
You're full of shit today. You're just being completely dishonest. Well, that's bullshit.
Shut up, rent-a-cop.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. While we await the arrival of Mr. SG Anon, Scott and I thought we would at least just chat a little bit before he gets here. He's on the way, and we have him for about an hour today. There was a little bit of a scheduling thing, but we've got that, I think, under control. So, Scott, how you doing, man, down in Arizona?
Yeah, doing good. I'm a little bit under the weather, but getting over it quickly. And at least I have some sunshine. You're deep in the weather, it sounds like.
Oh my God. In fact, yeah, you know, so part of where this opening was shot, I think what inspired it, I want to, hopefully this page I can share. I'm going to show you in the last couple of days what the water's been like up here in Washington State, and it's subsided a little bit. I don't know how, because it's been raining so much, but I want to show you a video from our friend Dave's property, and hopefully this works. So I'm going to share the screen here, the Facebook. Here we go. Okay, can you see this?
I can.
Okay.
If you can make the video full screen, it'd be easier. There we go.
Let's see how much.
Oh my goodness. Oh wow.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah,
I
that's
mean, that the shack is an island.
yeah. Yeah, that's up in the Packwood area, if anyone is familiar with Washington State. And there's, I mean, obviously Dave's property is right on the river. So yeah, we haven't been there in a little while.
A lot of good
That's
memories there. Yeah,
oh my
but
gosh, that's where we when in summer of 2021, Scott and I took the Airstream that I'd redone and had a bit of Scott's help on down to Shasta, and that's where we shot the Freedom Now video with Nick Alvear, who I believe we're going to be having on the show on Sunday as well.
Sunday, yeah.
Yeah.
Evening.
And yeah, and then we took it to Packwood. We took it down to the Columbia River, to our friend, well, it was through Mara and Haley and Richard, and had some amazing journeys in that. And then of course there was a fire. Geez, I can't believe that was nearly 4 years ago now. A fire in the Airstream, an electrical fire. And luckily I had insurance. In fact, I was so in shock trying to think of like, okay, what's the workaround here? And Scott taps me on the shoulder and says, you have insurance, right? But I guess I thought insurance for an Airstream that I tow would have been more for, if I got in a wreck, or if I, someone hit it, or it came off or whatever. I wasn't thinking fire. So thank God I had that insurance. Holy cow.
Yeah, it's amazing how the last 4 years have blown by. And it's just I mean, we're a decade into Trump now. We're
Right.
We've been in this rather strenuous journey. For those of us that are awake, I can't imagine what it would be like to be asleep. But I don't know. Maybe ignorance is bliss, but they don't seem very happy on that side of the aisle. So
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're going to cover with SG today is how, I mean, we're looking at things like the whole Candace Owen, Tim Pool debacle that's been unfolding, and wondering, how much is that is theater? How much does Tim have to do something like that for his income and sponsors, what have you? In fact, our friend Steve Collins, who I work on the music with, he said that Tim Pool's lost a couple million subscribers. I don't watch him that closely, so if anyone in the chat knows more about that, please feel free to mention that. I don't know if Scott has dug into that topic yet or not.
I mean, Tim is one of the hardest working guys in podcasting. He's just he's started out kind of on the left and sort of a centrist,
Right.
And graduated over to a little bit right of center. And he's made a fortune. He's made millions, but he's it's looking like a lot of that is maybe APAC money or Israel money, or something along those lines. There seems to be an appeal to funding. It was an off the chain. Well, we've got SG.
We got SG, so we'll welcome SG and we'll let him know. Welcome, SG. How are you?
Doing well. Thank you for your patience with my arrival. It's good to be here.
Absolutely.
It's been too long.
Yeah, I think since May. But yeah, Scott, go ahead. Catch SG up with what we were just talking about. I think it'd be a great topic to start on.
Yeah, well, I'll just introduce it a little differently. So, when the Charlie Kirk assassination happened and all the events surrounding it, it was kind of overwhelming in a very interesting way. I've talked to other people about it, and everybody kind of pulled back from the news cycle a bit out of, I think, exhaustion. And it's still going strong. A lot of strange anomalies around that situation. But most recently, Tim Pool delivered just a scathing and I think rather embarrassing rant about Candace Owens that he's taken a lot of heat for. He just completely lost it on air. And Candace delivered a really relaxed response to it, which I think just added salt to the wound. But this seems to be an appeal to more Israeli funding, I think is kind of the general opinion. What do you think, SG? What's going on there with the Tim Pool, Candace Owens debacle as it relates to turning point?
Well, it's interesting. I try not to take too much of a position on interpersonal squabbles that are going on out there, but I've been watching this one, and it seems to be characteristic of a broader struggle that's happening in the ideological titration process that everyone is sort of going through right now. And we're sort of learning where we're at as a culture and as a people and as a civilization, what our concepts of America really truly are, what it means to be American, what it means to be German, what it means to be Irish, British, French. You sort of get the idea, on and on.
Right.
And so looking at what's happening right now between an influencer that is, and really we should call him what he is, he's a citizen podcaster, and he's a source of tremendous geopolitical commentary and influence in the American digital media landscape. We have that particular party who's been alleged a number of different times by other individuals, including Miss Owens, but there's other individuals also, as being literally financially rewarded for a specific angle or a specific bent or a lens on things. And you have someone else who, by the same token, in the other direction, seems extreme enough in some of those discourses to also appear financially rewarded in another fashion, sort of holding the attention either on the extreme right of one issue or the extreme left of one issue. And that's not to make a claim about that on either side. I'm not going to allege whether anyone in this operation that is clearly happening between the two of them is paid or not, and what their motivations and true intentions really truly are. But I would like to highlight that the journeys seem very different, very interesting, and at least on the part of Miss Owens, we have some pretty significant world-changing journalism that has come from her platform over the last 24 months. Whereas to Mr. Poole's credit, while he's got a lot of growth, a lot of expansion, he's got access to the White House press corps and things of that nature, and that's extremely admirable, and I'm very happy for him in that regard. We've not seen the same type of gritty journalistic work coming from that particular platform. And when we go and read a tweet that was put out on Mr. Poole's personal profile, ostensibly by himself, I think it was June the 9th or June the 8th of this year. You'll have to forgive me on the exact date, but the tweet reads something along the lines of, Israel is the nexus of morality and can literally do no wrong. And then the tweet goes on to explain that if Israel does it, it is good. And this is not me sort of adding hyperbole to the situation. This is a direct quote from that particular post. So wow. As you look at that, it's hard to sort of step back and appreciate what the true angles are. I think it's very interesting that this particular scuffle has been drummed up as a result of the Charlie Kirk situation. I don't believe that that's any more coordinated in the sense than just a conflagration of interest where someone's feelings are really whipped up about an issue. Someone else's feelings and perspective are also really whipped up about an issue, and that particular issue becomes the cross-section where those horns get interlocked. And I think that's what you have going on right now. But what it's doing is it is exposing who has strong discourse skills and abilities, who has the evidence, if you will, or documentation to come and prove certain points that they've made. And now, while it is true, we're still waiting on other documentation that's been, talked up but not really been truly disclosed. And I'll acknowledge that can be sometimes a fault of Miss Owens. I think that she is very impassioned and very heated about the things she looks into and, promises to show these things. And normally they get shown, but it can take some time, I've noticed, with her actual publication of some of those types of materials. But regardless, we've got one side that has demonstrated a willingness and ability to do that on this particular topic, and the other side that seems to be just very, very emotional and quite frankly, very upset. And while I empathize with that point of view, it does not do a great deal for the crowd that's more ideologically aligned in that direction. And I think the lesson here, if I may, is to branch off of the binary and to move into what is actually resource-based truth and what is reality-based truth, like in the moment, where you're able to look at real-world documents or activities or actions, executive orders we've talked about a number of times on this show and others, versus what we hope to be true, what we would like to be true, but what is not yet fully fleshed out to begin with, and may actually be shortfalling in some forms or fashions if it's presented as that truth.
Well, thank you for that. It seems like there's been such an attempt to inject emotion, into the cycle, which really does cloud judgment. People picking sides or valuing one, entertainment over facts. I hesitate to use the term reality because I don't even know what that is anymore. But and I don't want to belabor the point. I think this. The whole Charlie Kirk situation has gotten so much press. People are exhausted with it. But I do want to ask you, it's been presented that the the crime scene, was molested almost immediately, and there was an interesting looking camera, or what we thought to be a camera above, behind. It was mounted behind Charlie, and there were some podcasters that came on with some interesting information about that. That indeed it wasn't a camera, but a projector, a holographic projector that required a 10 by 10 space in order to function properly, and then, in fact, that tent was 10 by 10. There was also reportings, I mean, unconfirmed, of a trap door under the stage. Kind of like we saw in Sandy Hook, there was demolition that took place almost immediately after at the site. A lot of anomalies, a lot of things outside the standard protocol. And so, there's a number of different ways to look at it. I don't know if anyone has the hard answers, but are you driven to one opinion over another in this regard with what happened with Charlie?
Great question.
I don't think I'm driven to one opinion or another on that particular backdrop. And the reason why I say that is because it's sort of irrelevant what the actual transpiration of in the moment by moment events were, as it pertains to whether or not Charlie is alive somewhere, or whether or not Charlie is truly, passed along into that next phase of this journey. And the reason I say that is because when we look at the transpiration of events after that particular event, in other words, the broader sequence of events that has occurred over the last 45 to 60 days or so, coming up, I guess, right at 60 days, right around, that has now written a historic record and has sent, at least for purposes of the United States domestic landscape and domestic changeovers, leanings one way or another, it has now started a new trajectory. There's been a new rocket that has been launched off in that particular direction. And so, I was having this debate actually with a pretty decent Anon not that long ago about, this is another example of a coordinated psyop to, carry the narrative forward in a particular way, and whether that psyop is authentic in what it showed, or whether that psyop is disingenuous for the greater good, which is sort of paradoxical in terminology, but that was the terminology used. Regardless of what the actual transpiration was and what actually happened there, the effect, the net takeaway, is identical. And so we have a situation now where a lot has been spawned off in the interrogative arena, in the question asking arena, and the being loud and vocal about, putting a voice to some of the issues that we, the people, are obviously noticing. And I think we're seeing cooperative components to that actually coming out and doubling down, or providing the stage and the scaffolding and the structure necessary to allow that to proliferate, because you have this extremely dubious narrative that has come from 2 or 3 different official institutions and agencies on behalf of investigations pertaining so-called back to this Charlie Kirk situation, and none of them make very much sense. And at the same time, you have concurrent allegations coming from Miss Owens. Actually, interesting that we should keep talking about that her reporting on this, and her reporting about the Brigitte Macron situation that occurred over the last 12 months or so. I think she published that investigative report sometime in 2024. Her reporting, excuse me, over those 2 particular issues has now climbed high enough in the geopolitical influence sector worldwide that there is an alleged assassination hit that has been put out on her, and some very interesting details about a Ukrainian and Russian connection that moved to Nashville, Tennessee very recently. I think his name was Arkady Gaitamok, if I'm not mistaken. That has now come out as well, just in the aftermath of those allegations that there's this nation state actor level hit that's been put out on her. So looking at this Charlie Kirk situation, I want to be sensitive, obviously, to Mr. Kirk's memory and to the memory of, that his family will hold of him, regardless of whether or not he is still here or not. I guess if I was to put my finger on the topic itself, I would say that for intents and purposes of forward discussion, I probably wouldn't claim that he's alive somewhere. But at the same time, it's truly a situation of we don't know, because this is obviously an operation. This is obviously an intelligence style operation that has occurred here. None of the ballistics information makes sense. None of the landscaping and terraforming information makes sense. The investigation being so open and shut so quickly, and now proceeding into this, this sort of court prosecutorial process in such a rapid amount of time makes no sense. All of the information that has come out from Miss Owens and other very good researchers out there about Turkey, about Egypt, about Miss Kirk's travels throughout the last 24 months or so, all of this should be tied up in a true serious investigative effort, yet it does not seem to be. But at the same time, as we look forward and what that has actually done, it has exposed the willingness of certain nation state level institutions and organizations and entities to participate actively and very purposefully and very deliberately in what amounts to waging of war against we the people population groups, which under military law we would be considered unarmed civilians. And so what you have there is implicitly the committance of a war crime within a series, within a various sequence or cascade of escalating war crimes that I'm cautiously hopeful are going to come out before the end of this particular presidential term.
Yeah, and it would seem that there's an awful lot of data points that point to Israel's involvement, both directly and indirectly, alleged by Candace Owens, alleged by others. And I'm almost wondering, because so much of this looks theatrical, and we're always asking, or is this the movie we're watching? And I kind of wonder what's being exposed here. What is the what are these optics designed to do? And this one's just all over the place. It's so hard to read.
Well, what's interesting about that is, it deflects from being able to zero in on a particular investigative pathway. And that's why there really does have to be a sort of citizen journalism effort here that really needs a united front, because many hands make light work. And there's a lot going on with respect to how this event happened. I will share part of a conversation that I had about 3.5-4 weeks ago with a contact of mine who spent a long time in cross-border transnational criminal law enforcement landscapes. And one of their assignments over that period of time was about 26 or 27 years of that. One of their assignments was to go and actually do a mapping and a reconnaissance gathering style mission, if you will, out there for the entirety of the domestic U.S. landscape with respect to threat actors and whether or not those threat actors were paramilitary, state-based, where they likely came from, the reasonable intelligence that we had about them at the time. And so that's been several years back. It's the information itself on that avenue would be a little bit outdated. But one of the things that they relayed to me about 3.5-4 weeks ago was that they had recently had conversations with other individuals that were still in that sphere, operating in this sort of gray area jurisdictionally, where they're not part of a specific agency per se, but they are an advisory, an additional arm, if you will, of several different agencies, depending on the laws of the state that they're working in, both in the United States and internationally. And one of the things that was relayed to him was with respect to the Charlie Kirk situation in particular. One of the concerns is not so much the Israeli involvement, which there seems to be some sort of Israeli connectivity in the background just based on the behavior of Netanyahu, the behavior of TPUSA as a result of that particular event, especially in the rhetoric, some of the pastoral pulpits that have come out on behalf of TPUSA. I think it was TPUSA Faith or TP Faith, talking about basically blood adherence to the state of Israel. So I can acknowledge that looks very sort of prima facie and obvious. But one of the things that was relayed to my contact was that they're far more concerned about the French, German, and Ukrainian intelligence operatives that are inside the United States and have been coming here for a long time, far predating the Biden administration. And one of the reasons they have a concern for that is because in Ukraine specifically, and one of the things has been allowed to happen, been enabled, that's what I'm trying to say, in Ukraine specifically, is that a lot of these multi-state forces, a lot of these multi-state actors or stateless pirate actors are able to go into the Ukrainian countryside on some sort of assignment, following some sort of paper trail or some sort of mission. And typically it's interagency cooperative, or it's joint force, this or that or the other, or it's an educational advisory tour or a teamwork fostering style environment. But what happens is, because of the laws on the ground in Ukraine and because of the stateless components of some of the Ukrainian government, in other words, this sort of like acting as a diplomatic immune entity while also wanting the benefits of a governmental entity at the international level. But of course, we know no border was ever filed for that governmental entity. One of the things that allowed is for that paper trail to end in Ukraine, and for these multi-state actors or these multinational or multi-agency pirate-based or stateless-based co-ops to then use Ukraine as a springboard into a mission or an undertaking or the fulfillment of some objective, essentially off book. And the paper trail would then show them as returning from Ukraine or from the Ukrainian countryside or from some cooperative intersectory force, typically in Eastern or Southeastern Europe, and then coming back to their own country. And you would not be able to sort of track and trace what happened on the interim. And so this contact relayed to me that there's a much bigger concern about those particular intelligence communities because they've been wargaming with one another how they were going to respond to this second Trump presidency for a number of years now. And they're actually some of the same forces that are connected to the Butler, Pennsylvania attempt on President Trump's life in July of 2024. And one of the things that is likely to come out in this process with Charlie Kirk and with all of these other sort of investigative processes that have been undertaken by Secret Service and DOJ and others is that you have a NATO and outside of NATO influence coming against the United States in the form of really what amounts to spying, espionage, and sabotage, which are considered acts of war. So this is going to be a very interesting public narrative as we go forward and as these citizen journalist efforts really zero in on Charlie Kirk. Yes, are we going to find some Israeli and some other intelligence community involvement? I would be shocked if we didn't. But what I'm really looking forward to fleshing out and proving is what this person relayed to me not long ago, is that some of our so-called allies are actually the ones that are doing us the most harm.
Well said.
Excellent. Yeah.
I wanted to get SG's take on the recent Tucker Carlson interview with the gentleman named Milo. Scott, is it Yiannopoulos? How do you say his last name?
Yiannopoulos.
Okay. Yes. SG, did you have a chance to see any of that interview?
I did not, but if I'm not mistaken, isn't that the one that sort of undertook the interrogative line of how sexuality changes have occurred inside the U.S. landscape?
Yes, I'm going to play a short clip. It's so short, it's going to play twice. But I mean, it's a little abrasive probably for some, but he gets his point across so quickly that I think it's worth showing. And by no means do we disrespect anyone in the gay community by this. And I was taken aback by the subject matter of this. I mean, basically he's saying that no one is gay. I mean, and that it's trauma based. I mean, that's a very Cliff Note version of it, but I'm going to play this clip just so the audience can see what I'm talking about and how it relates to what we're seeing going on in the sexualization of children and schools and the transgender agenda, what have you. But this is the clip that I took out. And I'll, like I said, it's very, very quick. I'll play it a couple times. Here we go. Okay.
Not there anymore. So if you wanted to weaken a society to the point of collapse, fagotize it. Not there anymore. So if you wanted to weaken a society to the point of collapse, fagotize it. Not. So that being said, I mean, I guess from what you have heard about it and seeing this, I was surprised by it because he says he was a homosexual prior to, and he's abstained from sex for the last 5 years. But any intel or take or perspective from you would be appreciated, I think, on the subject matter.
Well, I think the only perspective that I would have to offer of any significant value is the fact that Tucker and several others like Russell Brand, George Calloway, I think is his last name, excuse me, and a few others out there, they are now beginning to take the Overton window, for lack of a better expression, and move it further over. And so you've got this willingness to engage in conversation and entertain lines of thought that have been seriously demonized for one reason or another. And one of the things that this provides, I think, is the ability to actually and honestly reflect on some of the societal changes that are out there. You know, I'm not going to make an opinion-based claim on whether or not someone's sexual feelings are authentic or not through the lens that I see from behind my own two eyes. I have no way of knowing that, nor do I really want to, quite frankly.
Right.
I would rather it just be a constitutionally based society where, as long as you're not harming children and doing no harm to others intentionally, you know, the more the merrier, have fun and have at it. So looking at this particular willingness to engage with that type of topic, though, I think that causes us to step back and say, well, what did atrazine really do? what does fluoride really do to the body? What did all of those artificial growth hormones put in pork and beef products in the late 1990s and into the early 2000s? How did they affect the explosion of sexual culture inside high schools? And there absolutely was. We saw an explosion of teen pregnancy. We saw an explosion of drug addiction. We saw an explosion of youth-based STDs and STIs. We saw an explosion of abortions in the 16 to 21-year-old age range between 1993 and the early 2000s, 2004, 2005, 2006. So we have to sit back and ask, what occurred there? Well, we were post-Childhood Vaccination Act of 1986, and that seems to be an interesting time frame. That would have been about that time frame where some of those would have been rolled to market, really well tested and disseminated and distributed evenly over a number of years. So early 90s from 1986, 4, 5, 6 years. Enough for things to proliferate really throughout the country and change the societal landscape. We got a new food pyramid, if I'm not mistaken, in the early 1990s, which was entirely inverted based on hormone care and hormone balance, designed specifically to weaken the organism. The terminology used on that video a moment ago, it's a little bit aggressive, and I understand the place that it comes from, but that's not the only tactic that was used. It was an entire assault, and has been an entire chemical and biological assault on our very substance as human beings since the 1960s. I mean, Operation Northwoods was literally their admission that they do this type of stuff all the time. So looking at what has occurred, I think having an interview like that with someone, supposedly from that community at a prior time, now moving into this other way of believing and looking at the world and interacting with people, and certain things that this individual feels are acceptable now, or are not acceptable now that were acceptable back then, and vice versa. I think that this does a great deal to advancing the public narrative of unification, because we should be able to have these talks without hating each other. I should be able to have a conversation with someone across the table from me that has a different sexual orientation, so long as that orientation is not aimed at anything or anyone that is 17 years old or younger, right? This is not hard to do. There's a gigantic X account called Gays Against Groomers.
Yep.
And it reads like an enormous MAGA account, for lack of a better expression of it, because the baseline understanding is that everyone wants to have the liberty to make their own decisions in accordance with their own conscience and their own relationship with whatever faith walk and religious worship walk they have. But we all have this common understanding that children and the very vulnerable and the very weak in society, so the very young and the very old, they merit special attention and special care, because they will affect the trajectory of a society, and they're sort of outcome determinant, if you will, on the health of a society overall. So I'm kudos to Tucker for having such a provocative conversation. I'm looking forward to seeing the more things that come from him and some others as we go through this broad process together, because we have to normalize the difficult talks again, or we're never going to get anywhere.
Very well said.
Well. What a great response. I want to shift things just a little bit. We tend to find ourselves occupied with, again, what is theater? What part of this is a psyop? What message is being delivered? How are they trying to seed the consciousness, and in what particular direction, and who's doing the psyop? Because there's so many of them going on. But it would seem that over the past few months, there's been a bit of a stagnation. Things followed a certain direction, and it made things a little easier to parse together and figure out what the strategies behind all this were. But as of late, it's gotten rather confusing, and it's up and down and sideways, and it's just kind of nuts. A lot of people are becoming apathetic, I think, as a result. But here we have Three Eye Atlas out there hovering, or not hovering, but coming directly towards us. I think it'll be closest to the planet on the 19th, if I'm correct. And there's a lot of lore and a lot of observation about what that might entail. Removing the veil, so to speak. And I've often wondered if we've been in a holding pattern, waiting for some larger catalyst, to impact humanity in a very profound way. 107 has talked about, God making an appearance, towards the end of this. We know that this is biblical. So would you agree with me, or is that just my interpretation that things have gone all sideways and Upside down.
Well, I don't think it's a sideways and upside down, but it is a topsy-turvy world by design right now.
Yeah.
For a lot of different reasons, right? And we've broken that down on, I think, previous discussions amongst ourselves before on calls like this.
Right.
Something that was very interesting that I heard about 3i Atlas, and I'm not an expert on the interstellar, extrastellar component of the discussion. My expertise really focuses more on how shifting pressures affect the changeovers in the landscapes around the world. And a lot of those pressures right now are being applied in original, unconventional, first-time ways, and it's very, very exciting. But 3i Atlas, I was having a conversation with someone, this has probably been a few months ago now, and one of their descriptions for this particular phenomenon was that the 3i Atlas itself, the actual occurrence of this coming into our conscious awareness at this moment in time, is intended to symbolize the activation of the third eye that actually ties into each and every one of us from a spiritual anatomy point of view. We have systems inside of our being, inside of our physical flesh, blood, and boneness that allow us to interact more fully and more completely with that extrasensory landscape. There is an electric field that emanates out from the human body. We're supposed to be able to interact with it much more consciously and much more deliberately. And it has great power in the sense that this is an electromagnetic world. So we have the ability to influence a lot of things. And the ability to have a little bit of what I would call peaceful insight, if you will, or powerful, Holy Spirit-driven insight. One of the main mechanisms for that, recognized in a number of different schools, including the Coptic Christian schools back in the early days post the death of Christ, is that what we would call so-called the third eye, or the intersection inside that emanates from the pineal gland inside the human brain, that is a powerful channel of intake. In other words, that is a resource that is given to us that is not given to all of the other creatures here in the world, because it is very sacrosanct and because it has a deep connection to being able to funnel spiritual guidance, really meshing with that blended Holy Spirit energy of God into a conscious awareness here in the world. And so as we look at this event and look at the concurrent events that are happening at the same time that this particular extrastellar or interstellar event is occurring, you have this massive pressure being applied all across humanity right now to decide purposefully and deliberately, what do you want? What is it that you as humanity desire? And I think all of us, as we look around the world and have conversations like this, we can boil that down to not a whole lot of many things that are relatively simplistic and straightforward. The ability to worship freely and in good conscience, in alignment with what our heart truly desires and how God meets us and speaks to and with us. The ability to rear our children, the ability to determine our future in a self-directive fashion, not to shy away from the difficult labor that has to be done, but to have true control over where that labor's outcomes actually take us, and to not have the system literally rigged where the scales have a concrete block on one side, and so there's never this ability to achieve that balance, which is the essence of all of creation, is balance. We live in a world and a universe that is entirely of balance, and so we're being asked, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, but with this particular event, we're going through a symbolic season right now under the heavens where we're being challenged to activate those third eye spiritual capacities, which I believe, and again, my own personal opinion, tie back to God's will for us here in the world. What do we collectively, as God's agents upon this earth, what do we want to do? Do we want to transform and improve it? Well, obviously. Well, how do we do that? Well, we don't really know how to do that. We should go ahead and stop and think about what it is we actually want and how to flesh that out. And maybe while we do that, we should focus deeply on our own spiritual anatomy and our own spiritual connection and try to achieve that prayerful, quiet place. That is how I look at the entire 3i Atlas scenario from a very broad lens.
Wow.
I like it.
Very well said. There's a gentleman named Mickey that he went to an event in Florida this past weekend. And I wanted to play this clip for both you and Scott in the audience. And it's about him. I think he's a comedian, runs a radio show. He's just did a show with Joe Rambo and Dave and a few other folks. And it's him coming to terms with, the spiritual awakening. And it's a pretty powerful clip. And I think it's given, when Scott sees this, it's how I believe he and I both feel about our show and other people that have found shows like this to be very powerful and helpful in their awakening. I just wanted to share this with you because it's basically changing the complete trajectory of the show. He's built this show with his partner, I think his name's Matt, over the last 8 months, and now they're kind of, they're stepping into this more this type of subject matter. And, he might be losing people. He might be losing sponsors. It's very scary for him, but I wanted to share this with you. And I think it's very relevant to, where people are at right now. So here is the, share the screen. Here we go. This is on our X account. So this is about 1.5 minutes. So here we go.
Dude, I keep it as real as any motherfucker.
Yeah.
So here's what I'm realizing. This show saved my life. This show, I'm saying it for real. It saved my life emotionally and spiritually. It saved my life, Matt. When I had nothing, I had this show. And I'm God damn it, I sound so fake right now.
No, man, I don't think you do at all, because I feel the same way you do, in that this show gave both of us a little bit of hope to do something we love to do.
I just am coming to the realization that it's time to go to the next level.
Yeah.
And these shows, dude, and these people, and look, I got to say something. You're going to hear words like Q, right? Anon, all these things that go on in the world. I'm in none of it. I'm not in any of it. I'm not down the rabbit holes at all. What I am, though, is at least to a point where I go, okay, you know what? In all fairness, I don't know if I agree with anything, but I'm starting to at least respect the intellect of these people. Very much so. And I'm starting to respect the fact that we at least need to listen. At the end of it, we can say, hey, guess what? I see what you're saying. I'm not all in, but I do realize that's something we should probably keep an eye on.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
For sure.
Wow. So, yeah, are you familiar with Mickey at all? Is that something that's new for you?
New for me.
New for me as well. I had heard the name, but I had not had a chance to catch any of the programming.
Right. And I want to say this is the beauty of the friendships and relationships that we've built. We have a dear friend in Costa Rica, Carol Marine Friesen, this is her watching our show right now. She introduced me to Mickey and the beautiful vulnerability of which he is, coming into this realization with, and open-mindedness. And, he was on Rambo today talking about, he wants to get into this back and forth with Patrick Gunnels and say, Patrick, I know you believe the world's flat, but, I believe it's round and we may not agree, but just the willingness to have these conversations is very powerful. And, and when I heard this clip, I immediately thought of SG Anon. I'm talking to Scott like SG's not here for a second. the beautiful, brilliant intellect and compassion and empathy in which you come into this, and you have really kept, I would say, hundreds of thousands of people somewhat sane through navigating all this, and I'm one of them. So it's amazing sometimes that we have these shows with you, because like I've said on the show, this is like three guys hanging out, having a conversation. It's not necessarily so much an interview. It's just us, and we're sharing these conversations with people by opening up the laptops, having a public forum and having comments like what Carol just said. And so I just wanted to acknowledge what you bring to the table and what your thoughts are after seeing something like that, SG. So.
Well, you honor me greatly, and I am extremely delighted to hear that the work that I've done has, had a material effect beyond just resonating my own brain case around for a while, and sometimes it can feel that way. With respect to that clip, though, I think that clip is characteristic of of what is happening at a macro civilizational scale across the entirety of the West right now, and it should not be underestimated. What was described in that clip and what was clearly on display there was not a theatrical component of anything. It was a genuine transformation of heart and a willingness to relay that realization to the community. In other words, my awareness is now more. And while I appreciate everything that has been and everything that has been created up until this point and all of the progress that has been made, it is not lost on me that so much more yet remains. We were talking about Three Eye Atlas just a moment ago. Do we really appreciate how enormous of a conversation just that one topic alone really is? Do we really appreciate that there is an entire underground infrastructure, a literal civilization that lives inside the crust of the earth, all over the earth right now? That's one of the things happening in Venezuela that nobody's talking about. The actual transformation of this planet from one of darkness and despair and not knowing anything, ignorance, and being without knowledge and without access to the knowledge and without the education and that awareness. It's becoming a planet of light where that access to knowledge is not only present, but it's being amplified, it's being glorified, it's being actively sought out and actively expanded. Humanity is focused now in a way that has never been possible before on learning the same sets of variables about this planet that we all live upon and are a part of. And you're seeing increasingly more willingness from international actors in the citizen podcast or citizen media landscape to have other international figures from other countries sort of along in their same peer range and along in what would make sense from a wavelength standpoint for them to meet up and have these conversations together. But you're seeing this happen across the entirety of the earth. Boundary lines, while important for our territorial countries and for our identities nationally as we go forward as a diverse array of peoples all around the planet, they've been essentially made irrelevant through the information ecosystem and this broad data-based digital age that we're all a part of. And we're realizing that we are a part of a much higher level of awareness that is possible, that there are things out there that, even if they sound ridiculous, should be explored and perhaps even aired out a little bit, because hardly anything is as ridiculous as what's actually coming out of the CIA archives with each new declassification. So seeing what's happening right now, the transformation of his point of view to one of respect for a group that perhaps before he was kind of like, yeah, I don't really know. That seems a little bit out there to me. That is just in my own opinion, it is expressive of a much broader process that is happening across the entirety of the West, and especially in the United States of America. And what it's doing is it's dissolving a tremendous amount of friction-based mind control trauma that prevents people from having honest discourses with one another because they're afraid of the outcome rather than the process itself.
It is. It's a revolution. It's a revolution of authenticity. Authenticity is being demanded right now. There's a growing craving for that, which is so refreshing. And, I think it's amplified by the introduction of AI in so many areas of our lives and, all the obvious psyops and everything else. I think that's really feeding that. But I think it's a spiritual awakening that I think is most readily observed in this craving for authenticity.
Well, and I think you just hit the nail on the head, right? Authenticity means being authentic in one's purest self, in one's purest form. And if we're going to step back and define that, we probably all would define that in some paraphrased way as being the closest to God and God's spirit that we can possibly get. That is our purest form. We are photonic beings. We're not carbon-based. We have carbon in us, just like we have many other minerals and many other makeup components that go in to the flesh, blood, and bone structure, but we are light-based beings. And so the lighter that we are in spirit, the more full and the wholer that we are in spirit, the more authentic that we can be to one another. And that's the entirety of this process summed up really in just a couple of sentences.
That's so well said.
It really is. Did you have something you want to jump in with, Scott? I have one other clip that I can play in a little bit, but if you got something on the tip of your tongue.
I was just gonna add what George was talking about in our show last night, that the highest frequency is the frequency of authenticity. And in a time where a lot of people are, filled with fear or dread or whatnot, I see a courage emerging, and I think it's emerging out of that frequency. I think people are finding hope in places that maybe they wouldn't have without that accompanying commonality. that we're all seeing and feeling.
Right.
But you had a clip, Joe?
Yeah, because we got SG for about 15 minutes. Speaking of authenticity, I just wanted to let SG know, and I don't know if he saw our original interview with the gentleman named Kevin, who unknowingly, I mean, he basically, these people at two different times in his life offered him adrenochrome, and he took it. And there was a time travel component. And I went through the interview this week. It was originally a 2-part series, and I put it into one. And I wanted to play a clip from that and also show the thumbnail so people can, dig into this if they'd like. But we never heard a firsthand account of someone that's tried adrenochrome before and the components of that. This was a gentleman that was, I can't say a more specific word for it than this, when he was raped when he was 4 years old, and demons were attached to him, and he lived his life under substances, you name it. And later, then I forget how many years later this happened, I think 10 to 15, he was working in the fields of Northern California, thinking he was just working in a pot farm. And over time, he'd seen these children that were doing the clipping of the pot farms starting to disappear, and had the horrifying reality that they were actually being turned into this substance. I've never seen an interview like it. Like I said, I'm going to share the thumbnail of it so people can look at this. We just released this a couple days ago, and then I'm going to play a clip from it. But Scott and SG and I have talked about adrenochrome and many subjects on this channel, and I wanted to make people aware of this, because thankfully SG does take these shows and then upload them onto his channel. And so I think it's a perfect platform, because people are open-minded and articulate and want to learn more from SG. So I just wanted to share this because I think it might be of interest to his audience as well. So first of all, here is the thumbnail if people are interested in the show. And then here is a clip from the conversation we had with Kevin regarding this subject matter.
That's when the thing with adrenochrome is, I think that it has something to do with your spirit, and it helps. Like when you go to sleep at night, who knows where we go when we sleep? If our spirit leaves our body or whatever. I almost think that's kind of like what happens when you take adrenochrome. You almost like go into a dream, and I think that people are able to see into the future with the shit. I think this might be one way that they even look into the future. I don't know. I know they're able to look into the future.
Wow. Well, maybe that's why there's such an appeal for it in this world.
Well, and why they get away with it so much, they can see the threat coming, I would imagine.
But anyway,
so yeah,
please continue.
So, and in no way is he endorsing this. I think what he's saying is like the Simpsons episode, the ability for them to stage certain things, you name the psyop, that if they do actually have the ability to time travel and step into this dreamlike state, but actually alter reality, it's very mind-bending. So I just wanted you to see that, SG, so that because this is before, I believe, it was right around the time we started doing interviews with you, but you're very busy, and I didn't know if you were aware of this conversation that we had 3 years ago. But we basically re-released it because it's I've never heard anything like it. So your thoughts on that, if you would be so kind.
Well, it's very interesting, and honestly, I'm fascinated by his characterization of that. And I want to highlight something that comes to mind immediately and again, this is my initial impressions the first time I've seen this clip, but what came to mind when he was talking about how it like sends you into a dream state, and there are these sort of clairvoyant or extrasensory abilities that are unlocked as a result of the conscious blending of you and that broader perspective dream state version of you. One of the things that I thought about was, this universe of duality and justice, right? If we have a universe that is ruled by a just spirit, a just God, and that's what the book tells us, then that means we have balance. Balance is the embodiment of justice itself. Balance is the expression of what a just landscape looks like. And if there is balance, it means there's also equivalency. And so when you look at the ability to turn on your extrasensory component, parts of your body, your systems, what we were talking about just earlier with the spiritual anatomy that's been suppressed, if you can do that in the light by following Christ's example for, just for the purposes of this discussion, and coming into that spirit through this appreciation and gratefulness and this very authentic sincerity for the sacrosanct nature of the human body, the human being, who you are, and how powerful that spirit that creates worlds, that Holy Spirit of God really is. If you can activate it that way, then you can also activate it through adulterated means. And when we look at what has actually happened across the entirety of the world, there's a lot of speculation about the nuances for why certain ceremonial activities and certain sacrificial activities would have such gravitas to them and such persistence to them and such consistency over time. But one of the things that is not really debated by anyone, and is sort of understood that this is just a component of it, is that its effects, whatever comes from participation in those ceremonies and those types of very deep, salacious, evil activities, those effects are temporary and they do not last very long. And so there has to be a reuptake. There has to be a constant drinking at the well. It is the thirst that can never be quenched. So when you look at what's happening out there in the world, we're being called to quench that thirst forevermore and never thirst again. And that is the essence of the spiritual awakening. We can, as humanity, activate these same components of our consciousness, these same avenues and resources and assets that are available to us by virtue of us having the type of DNA that we have, and we can do it in the right way that balances this planet and helps to remove that very deep, very dark level of evil and what I would characterize as deeply occultic black high magic, removing it from this world and from this realm so that those particular effects reverberatively in that broader quantum reality that we're all a part of are not hindering us and keeping us back from who we really are at our core.
So well said. Gosh, I love these conversations. Scott?
No, I agree wholeheartedly. It's dark versus the light, and I think I don't know, go back to Babylon, look at read the Old Testament, look at all the sacrifice based religions, deities, the ones that are still alive today, Baal worship and Moloch and so on. It's foundational, I suppose, as to how we got here, and it's what we appear to be overcoming, I think, with the light.
Very, very well said.
I think that's a fantastic point. Go ahead, sir.
Oh, I was just going to say, I know we only have you another 5 minutes and anything you want to say in closing, but I'd love you to respond to that. I did not mean to cut you off.
Well, actually, it's very interesting. My closing statement would probably be a response of a sort to what Scott was just saying a moment ago, right? This transformation of the world, it's not happening only through God's Spirit in the sense that there's this, snap of a finger type change where everything is transformed in an instant and humanity's effort gradient was virtually zero. It is a co-creative dance. It is literally the Father asking the Son to help me frame the building, help me build this. Let's create something that actually is reflective of the type of talents and abilities that all of you are endowed with and imbued with. And that's the beauty of all of this. The Q Entity Online tells us there's a war for our DNA and explicitly instructs us to protect our DNA. Well, that must mean our DNA has tremendous value, perhaps value beyond the typical concepts of what we would consider value exchange to actually be. And so when we look at the world of the future and the awakening that we're all upon, it makes a great deal of sense that we would have to come into this in a fashion that is mutually aligned and very, very imbued actively and in the moment confidently with that particular spirit, because only that type of amplification, all of us together, can overwhelm the momentum that thousands of years of horribly deep evil has caused at that quantum resonant level here in our world. It really does have to be a tidal wave of a change. And as we look at conversations like this and others that are happening consistently, daily, weekly, monthly, pushing the boundaries of thought, expanding the subject matter that people are willing to talk about, embracing the concepts of going extreme with some things as long as it's not violent, and maybe walking back from that to find where the truth actually lies. That is the beauty of this journey, and it will eventually overwhelm that darkness with shining light.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Scott, anything in closing you want to say? I've shared everything I needed to, because I know we have them for about an hour and that's coming to a close. So please.
No, I know. I just need about 5 more hours, but we don't have it. So we'll have to do another show sometime soon. I suppose we're sadly at the end of the show, but SG, if you could stick around for a moment after the credits, that would be great.
God bless all. Thank you for having me back.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate you. I'm going to just roll the outro, and SG will talk to you very momentarily. All right. Take care.
I have known for some time something about the world ain't right. The darkness lives in plain sight. In the ether, adjust your eyes. There are those that have no clue. You give them hints, they just stare at you. Most have lived in Plato's cave, watching